There are those individuals for whom driving is much more than a means of achieving a destination. It is an end in itself. It is for this driver that the Acura NSX was crafted.
Most people, it's usually like their dad or, they always played with cars their whole life or something like that. My dad knew nothing about cars, drove minivans all his life. In my case, it was really like the friends I had in high school that taught me how to drive stick, that kind of exposed me to the freedoms and the benefits and the kind of passion that comes with being a car guy and being an enthusiast and being involved in the community. Even then, it was tough to become a car enthusiast, I guess, in my family, because I wanted to get like a 240 and I wanted to get a sports car and I wanted to get like into drifting and stuff like that kind of stuff. Whereas my dad was like, no, you have to have like a 4-door front wheel drive, automatic, things like that. So when I was trying to be a car enthusiast, I really had to focus on what it was that I liked about cars, or that I liked about the cars that I had gotten interested in, and try to focus on that. That's a good example. I wanted a 240, I decided, because I really wanted an SR20. So I got an SR20 in a front wheel drive automatic 4-door, and that was my first car. I had an Infiniti G20 because that's just how that married up. Again, it was tough because it was like an uphill battle to like really do anything with the car. So any mods that I did had to be like super subtle, or like things that my parents would never notice. So I remember I put an intake on it, and there was one time when I was like cleaning under the hood, and he was like, "Hey, what happened? What happened there?" And he pointed out to where the airbox was, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I had to replace it. So I just put this thing." It's kind of weird. So it was stuff like that, and so I couldn't do things that were more wild. Like I couldn't do wings or a body kit or even wheels. And so I think my experience as a car enthusiast really started off as building the car experience within myself, which probably sounds super corny, but it's like, me learning to drive the car, learning where my own limits were, and trying to push those limits out, learning what I could about the car within reason before I even started modifying it, and just trying to build the experience instead of building the car. And I think that kind of just followed me throughout my car enthusiast life. When it came time to replace it, and I got a Legend, I fell into an Acura Legend. And a big part of that was because I had already kind of been captured by the idea of what an NSX was about. And the Legend was the closest I thought I would ever get. I want a car that has this particular motor and has this kind of infusion of Honda's best technology at the time. And in my mind, I was never going to get an NSX. It was just going to be 4-door sedans, front-wheel drive the rest of my life. And then it worked out. Like a number of years later that I had a chance to get one of these, and so I did. So this particular car was on Craigslist. I keep pretty good records of like my cars, how many miles I'm putting on, how much gas I spent, and mods, and I put spreadsheets together every year of like what my expected expenses are and stuff like that. And so there's a year that I had done it, and it looked like I was gonna have to spend like 15 grand on the Legend. And I was like, I like the Legend, I do, but I don't 15 grand love it. And so I started looking at like what my next car would be. And I first thought of the S2000 because I had kind of fallen into this obsession with like cars that were lightweight and cars that handle well, and cars that were fun to drive, even if they weren't that powerful. So I considered cars like the S2000 and the RX-7 and things like that. S2000 prices were ridiculous. Randomly searched NSX prices, and they weren't that much more at the time. I did the numbers, and I figured out, I was like, I could just get an NSX now. I didn't know how it would play out. I was living in DC at the time, so I tried to find local cars first. Pro tip, if you're looking for an NSX, you've got to look nationwide. In the case of this car, there's 2 of them, one in San Clemente or Laguna Hills, and one in Torrance. And so I'd planned this trip that I'd fly out. I talked to the owners already. I was like, I'll fly out, look at one of these 2 NSXs, and whichever one's good, I'll just buy it. Initially, I had a lot of reservations about it, for sure. On Craigslist, it's described as just a purple NSX. I didn't know NSXs came in purple at that time, and I expected like really, really ugly purple. It ended up being this color, which was pretty fucking cool. And then the more research I did, the more I liked it. The more I looked at the pictures, the more like it drew me in. I didn't realize it was rare. I didn't realize that it was pretty unique to these years. I didn't realize that I like purple apparently, but hey, apparently I do. The more I saw it, the more I kind of got hooked on the idea of owning this one in particular. And by the time I landed at LAX, I kind of had it made up in my mind that if I saw this car and everything checked out, I'd prefer this one over the silver one that would have been in Orange County. This car was the one. That day, the car had 83,500 miles. This was in December 2012. I was living in DC at the time. The car was in Torrance, and I bought it, and I immediately drove it down to San Diego to see my folks. My girlfriend at the time flew out. I picked her up at the airport, and then we just drove it. We drove it all the way back to DC, and yeah, since then, just driving it, I mean, whenever we get a chance. When we were living in DC, whenever we had like free weekend, 3-day weekend, if anything was in like a 12-hour driving radius, it was game. Yeah, we drive to like New York, we drive to like Florida, we drive to Chicago, we just do it. And then my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, she didn't have a car, she didn't need one. Like we were talking about earlier, in DC, you could just do public transit, you don't really need a car. I didn't need a car either, but I wanted one. So this was like our main car at the time. I mentioned my Legend. Basically, once I got this, I stopped driving the Legend, which is pretty sad. I was supposed to do the practical thing where I'd have like the fun car and like the practical car. It didn't work out that way. I just drove this and just started driving this like for everything, like groceries, work, go pick up my girlfriend, go run errands. Part of it for me, I think, is when I'm in a car, any car, it doesn't matter, it could be like a Prius, or it could be like my wife's Tesla. But any car, for me, is exciting. There's a sense of getting into a car and feeling whatever the particular quirks of the car are. But regardless, a car is like this magical machine that'll take you on these wonderful adventures, you know, and it's just a cool thing. And the NSX elevates that. The NSX is not a car that gets in the way of the driving experience. It doesn't just do things for you. There's other kinds of cars where you get into it and you point the car at stuff and like, you know, all the electronic gizmos and computers figure things out, and the car will just like automatically do it, right? Like it's got the power, it's got the traction control, it's got the power split left, right, front, rear, whatever it is, and it'll just do it. You know, it's like a real life video game. And the problem with those kind of cars, well, objectively, yeah, for sure, they're super fast and it's really impressive. But you can't really tell the difference between a good driver and a bad driver because it's the car that's doing it. An NSX is not like that at all. An NSX will like absolutely punish you for a mistake. And one of my favorite videos that talks about the NSX is they're doing this review where these really experienced car journalists are driving the NSX around and they wreck the car while they're doing their test drive, and they're doing like their comparo against like the 911R and the Corvette ZR1 and some other stuff, and they wreck this car. And then they bring the car back like a few years later to do like a follow-up, and then they wreck it again. You know, and it's one of these cars where like, it really highlights to them that this is a car that will punish you for stupid mistakes. You know, you go in too hot and it'll punish you for it. And it's a car that very much reflects you and your state as a driver at that time. It's like, you know, you're putting on your Gundam suit or whatever, and it's just gonna reflect whatever it is that you're doing. You know, it's not gonna make you a better driver than you are. It's gonna reflect exactly the driver that you're capable of. And so it's very rewarding in that sense, where you see someone who, you know, maybe they just can't afford like a 1,000 horsepower car, or, you know, they really focus on the driving experience, and they kind of come to life in a car like this, where it's this car that reflects what you're thinking, what you're feeling, how you feel the road, and your direct inputs and your interpretations of them like are reflected in how the car will take each apex and how it's positioned in the lane. And you even see it when you're driving with a bunch of other NSXs. Like when I'm driving behind them, I feel like I can feel their personalities by watching how they are on the road. You know, there's guys who tend to hug the center lane when they're going around curves, and there's other guys that, you know, hound the cars in front of them, and it's reflective of their personalities, and you could see it, you could feel it, and it's this very visceral, very raw sensation, and that the NSX can reflect, and that it really brings out in you as a driver. It's like you can wear your personality on the outside with this car. And yeah, it's this very pure driving experience. There's the kind of person who sees the car, knows exactly what it is, and so they kind of come with it, kind of come to the car with all these preconceived notions, like, oh, this car is my favorite in Gran Turismo, or I love this car in Fast and Furious, or whatever, and like, oh man, it must be so fast. And sometimes, like, I have to like break their hearts a little bit. It's like, it's actually kind of slow, but it is really cool, you know. So there's that. Or sometimes if they know a lot about the car, then I kind of just, you know, talk about it and share that kind of experience with them, which is, you know, that's pretty cool too. And then there's the other type of person where they don't know anything about the car at all, but somehow they can tell there's something special about it. You know, it's like a Corvette, but it's not. Or that's a pretty cool looking car, but I don't know what it is. In some ways, that second kind of person is what I like to, is the kind of person I like to talk to, because then they come at the car and they don't know why it's special, but it brings something out in them, right? Like they'll come to me and say, hey, you know, my boyfriend used to have a car like this, or my dad, you know, he used to tell me about this car all the time. Or it might not even be about this car. It might just be like, my boss used to drive this really cool sports car, XYZ. And it's about this car that's completely different and completely irrelevant to like what an NSX is about. But it doesn't matter, because them seeing the NSX like spark, you know, this memory for them. And it brings out this kind of hidden passion about cars in general. And they start talking about these experiences with their dad or their brother or you know, their boss or whatever, or even just, you know, seeing this car that they used to see on their commutes. But them just being excited about it. I think it's just so fucking cool, and I like sharing that moment with them. And it makes me really appreciate the car, that it excited that about, you know, it excited that from them and elicited that sort of response. People look back at how the car debuted, you know, with rose tinted glasses. If you read the criticism of the car when it first came out, I think those are probably equally telling. Oh, you know, the NSX is very conservative. The NSX is a very safe design. The NSX is very pedestrian next to like the Ferrari 348 and things like that. So those criticisms came out, and they sounded pretty harsh at the time that, you know, Honda was for the first time trying to excite people with a car of this type. And I think it's really easy to forget that there were also criticism of the car. But it worked out that Honda making a car so conservative in its styling or making it so safe in its styling resulted in a more timeless design. I mean, this car was sold with pop-up lights from 1990 to 2001. And in 2002, the big change was finally making fixed lights. But otherwise, the car was almost exactly identical to how it was sold before that. And so it kind of is a testament to the timeless quality of the car, or its ability to still capture like the imaginations of car enthusiasts for such a long period. I'm gonna bring up the second gen NSX because I think it kind of reminds me of like the second gen NSX, where, oh, this car is just too expensive, or it's this car that's shouldn't be called an NSX or whatever. And I don't want to make like a direct one for one, but a lot of the things that people criticize the second gen NSX for now kind of sound like the things that the first gen NSX was criticized for also. So it might be the case that, hey, 20 years from now, people will look at the NC1, the second gen NSX, and like, you know what, that car is pretty fucking good at the time. Future plans, I'm gonna keep on driving it, man. I'm just gonna keep on driving it as much as I can. I did a bunch of stuff in the past year and a half, a bunch of mods that I had always wanted to do, never had a chance to do, a bunch of maintenance. I'm just throwing money at the car right now. Yeah, I don't have specific plans, actually. I just wanna keep driving it. I just wanna keep enjoying it. I'm coming up on 300,000 miles, probably in the next maybe year and a half. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to more trips like this.